how do you try to judge that, right? So when you think about like excellent entrepreneurs, and presumably
Yeah.
there's lots of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and in the world who are trying to change the world.
Yeah.
There's only so many who are going to get invested by great VCs. And even a
Yeah.
small percentage of those are going to be successful. Now, you want to optimize as a VC. You want to make the best choices you can to have a higher, better outcome in return.
Yeah.
What are the qualities you're looking for to
Yeah.
try to identify a great entrepreneur?
The story just makes a ton of sense. It's the guy with diabetes who sold his last company for $500,000, who's going to build a platform to solve this problem with disease. And the person is just amazing. You just know they're going to be able to raise capital from other people. And even a third of those will still fail. But, when they win, they're worth $10 billion. And that's insane.
Man, I actually feel somewhat guilty sometimes. Like, I invested early in you and you did all the work. And now my stake is worth 10 to 20x what it was because you did all the work. And I just happen to be lucky enough to have capital to put into you. But yes, I made the right bet. And I made some of these bets before anyone else would because other people didn't see it. And my small bet then enabled them to get a few more small bets, money in. And then that led to everything else taking off. So very excited to welcome my wonderful guest for today, Kent Lindstrom, one of the general partners of 8-Bit Capital, to the podcast today. And Kent is such an exciting person to have on. One, because he lives near me in San Francisco. And so right before this call, we were having a fantastic conversation about what it means to live in this terrible, wonderful place called San Francisco and proactively choose to be here. But there's good reasons for that as an entrepreneur and tech person. But then also all the amazing things Kent has done in his career, everything from Friendster, one of the original social networks, to Nuzzle, which we haven't even had a chance to talk about, but one of my frankly personal, like truly personal favorite apps. I'm still sad it doesn't exist. And then to his own podcast and to having a venture capital firm. So Kent has really seen what it means to be a great entrepreneur, why great entrepreneurs, despite all of their skill sets, might still fail, and what all of that means and looks like. So Kent, welcome to the show.
Oh, this is great. Thank you so much.
It's absolutely my pleasure. So maybe kick us off with what I'd like to do is really walk us through the beginning of your career, where you got started, how you ended up where you are today in this amazing journey, and just maybe start us at the beginning.
Yeah, so I came up on the finance side. So I came up, went to school at Northwestern, had an MBA, CFA, was working at Deloitte in Silicon Valley. And, in the late 90s, if you were Deloitte in Silicon Valley, what you were doing was you were working with a bunch of tech companies. And if you're at Deloitte, you're a successful tech company. And this is back when the internet was cool. Like, it was just, the internet, there'd be 50 million people and 75 million. It was amazing. And I just got the bug. And I just said, it seems like the people who are building companies are having a lot more, fun's not the right word, but are doing something much more fulfilling than the people who are advising them. And so I started my own, or I joined somebody. I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm the guy who helps the guy, the lieutenant, think of this like Sheryl Sandberg.
And actually, I'm gonna pause you there actually really even quickly on that front. So what is the distinction in your mind? And sorry, I do tend to do this, hopefully ask questions and take us in totally different tangents sometimes. But what I know a lot of people who would describe themselves that way. It's like they much prefer to be the lieutenant.
Yeah.
What is that personality type, and why is that important or not important for the entrepreneur to have as part of their company?
Yeah, I mean, to be good at it, you need to understand that you're not the alpha dog, you're not the inventor. And the people I've worked with have been incredible, have invented incredible things. I understand, if you think about music, like I'm not Mozart, but I understand when I hear the music that it's amazing. Yep. And that's what it is. It's being that lieutenant who goes, I don't need to be the alpha dog. You're the engineer, you're creating the product, and I'm the guy who's going to do everything around that to make you successful. And if you can have a great partnership like that, I mean, think of Steve Jobs and Tim Cook, or, certainly Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg never went around saying, oh, I invented, social networking or whatever it was. It's being that, being that person. And so that's who I've always been. And being like a finance person, a business person, working consulting at Deloitte is probably not a bad, it's probably not a bad role for you. You can be an entrepreneur who's not an engineer, but in Silicon Valley, it helps. And the people I've partnered with have all been I couldn't write a line of code to save my life. So, they're far more technical than I.
Do you find that when you're investing in companies that you're looking for companies that have a co-founder partnership, like one where there's sort of the alpha entrepreneur CEO creating
Yeah.
ideas and sort of the more business person who's like, let's focus and get it done?
Not necessarily. That's a little bit of a later stage thing that I'm talking about. So we do seed stage investing, and seed stage investing is usually one or two people who are going to hire three or four people to try to prove something in the first few years with the few millions of dollars we give them. And so the thing that I'm talking about is a little bit later, in the company's evolution. But I will tell you, starting a company yourself, people do it, seems insane to me. And so, some of our entrepreneurs are one person, one woman, one guy starting something. And some of them are two people, either model really works, we'll do both of them. But I think you look for that to develop over time. And it's a hard alchemy to get right. But that's more a scaling thing as you start to get to 15, 20 people, and the founder's either going to scale with it or not, or they're going to go find somebody to be their lieutenant, basically.
What sort of founder mentality does it take to figure out, can I scale, right? Because there's a lot of ego. A lot of founders I know have a lot of ego, which makes sense, right? You have to have the level of hubris to say, I'm going to create something brand new that has never existed in the world before. And I'm the one to go do it. Like that is a little bit of an insane mentality. And by the way, I'm saying that as someone who's done this 4 times. So I'm probably certifiable at this point, but like what does that look like when the founder can also say, like, I'm insane enough to have found this, but I'm willing to step back a little bit and bring on that sort of COO or second person?
I think you have no idea. At the earliest stages, you kind of have no idea. I mean, if there's a seed company, the whole thing that you're trying to do is create something that anybody in the world gives a damn about. Just if you can get to the point where anybody cares about your product, you're ahead of 90% of startups, basically. And then the scaling piece comes later, whether you can do it or not. And one of the most helpful things I think about is that the company changes. I don't know who said this originally, but every 3x, the company is a different company. So 9 people, you can think what that's like. Well, think what 3 people's like, and then think what 9 people's like. Okay, 27 is a little bit different, right? You're probably not talking to everybody every day. Okay, you triple, now you're around 100 people. Now you've got an HR person and all of that. Do you know how to manage that kind of a thing? And so each one of those is kind of a step function. And early on, it's about realizing I can't talk to every single person every day. And around 100 people, I don't know everybody's name. And around 100 people, structures start coming in. There needs to be an HR department. Mm-hmm. You're going to have problems because Johnny's harassing Susie and there's a lawyer in your office on Tuesday morning. That's what it becomes. So, somewhere in there, either you happen to be a genius manager, which is pretty rare, but it happens, or you kind of just understand that that's what you need to do, and you bring in the right people and the right team. And, getting that right is kind of battle number 2. Once you've got people figuring out your product, getting the team right is battle number 2. Because if you don't get it right the first time, man, it's hard to fix.
Yeah, no, it's really hard to fix if you don't get it right. But how do you know then if you're not getting it right or if you're making mistakes? Like what are the proof points that you look for in companies you worked at or ones you've invested in? I guess sort of 2 things. One, when should a founder start thinking like, I need to make this level? Is it when they get to that next sort of that tripling of like between 20 to 30 people?
Yeah.
And then when do they know like, hey, like this isn't right. I need to make a drastic change.
Yeah, around it's probably around 30 people. And don't forget, for what we do, seed stage investing, this is kind of funny. I've run and scaled companies like all the way up to hundreds of people. At the seed stage, by the time you get to hundreds of people, we're kind of not the alpha dogs on the cap table, right? There's a Series A firm has come in and this is their thing to, screw the company up or not. But I think it's bringing in that team of lieutenants who can kind of take you from, managing 50 people to managing 500 people, say. And you kind of know who those people are. And then way down the road, there's a thing where you go hire like the VP from Microsoft, someone who's run big things. Yep. But you kind of know roughly who the people are going to be, right? There's going to be some kind of head of engineering. Then there's going to be some kind of head of HR and some kind of finance person and some kind of sales person. There's going to be like 4 or 5 people that you talk to every day. And getting that alchemy right is it's just the most critical thing. It's hard to do. You have to find people who want to do what you're doing, but are experienced enough to leave their job and come work for you. And if you don't get the alchemy right, I think it can be almost impossible to fix sometimes. Like, because your whole company culture will be off, and
So
disaster.
what advice then do you give to your founders to get this right and to be thinking about it proactively and make sure they're creating that culture that can grow and sustain itself even as the founder has less and less direct impact because just a big.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Culture is not quite the right word. There's a pretty famous VC who told me once. She was like, "If you're ever at a board meeting talking about culture, the company's probably screwed." It's like, okay.
Yeah.
And so I think what you basically want, or what I want, is a bunch of people who are super competent, know what they're doing. They don't need to be rock stars because you're not reinventing finance. They need to be very good at finance and very competent. They don't need to be out there, you're not going to reinvent finance. You're not going to reinvent legal. You're reinventing the one thing that you're doing, which is whatever your product is out there. And so I think the most important thing is to make sure you have people who really are excited about what you're doing, really competent, don't want anybody else's jobs, and don't care about anything else but your company being successful and creating the economic viability that comes from that. And a thing that happens in Silicon Valley, or at least I've experienced it, is you have a different set of employees sometimes than you would have running, say, a manufacturing company in the Midwest,
Mm-hmm.
such that people will come to your company religious about something else.
Mm.
And there'll be some open source project that's more important to them, or they read a book that says that everybody should share their salaries with each other, or that why isn't there vegan jerky and
Yep.
or what's our policy about God knows what's going on in the world. And it sucks. It just sucks. It just drains your energy. It's brutal. It can get out of control. It sucks. And so to me, it's just finding people who basically like working with each other, basically know what their job is, and are basically excited when you tell them what to do and get out of their way, they're going to do it.
Yep.
It's kind of the thing that Steve Jobs told us the whole time. Like, get really competent people, get them really focused on what they're doing, and get the hell out of their way.
Yep.
And I think the mistake that people make is they try to get too rock star and all that kind of stuff. And rock stars are a pain in the ass, Like,
Yep.
they drink too much. They don't show up for the show. Just get good, competent people to do what they're doing and get back focused on what the thing is that you're building.
So how do you, I'm guessing, have probably interviewed, hired, and likely fired hundreds of people in your career. How do you look for those really competent people who can jump on board with your vision and mission and just get down to business and focus without you micromanaging them?
Yeah. When you see it, right? And I think the key thing to be careful of, that I've fallen victim to a few times, is be careful about like resume-ism, right? Like, there's fantastic people who have worked at companies you haven't heard of, and the companies haven't worked out. And now this is different. Look, people worked at Deloitte and, et cetera, Franklin Room and accounting, whatever it is, are pretty good at what they do. But you don't need to hire somebody who worked at, went to Stanford, worked at Facebook, worked at Google. They may be a little too rock starry for you, right? They may be, if your company is not at that level, they might just be too cool for you. And I would say, first of all, make sure you're talking to people who have actually struggled, right? Who have worked at a company that maybe didn't work out. Because if you worked at Google, during a certain time period, money was just falling out of the sky.
Yeah. And everything was easy, right? Everything was just easy. Yeah. Everything worked.
Oh, nothing. Like, you're a genius, and you invented AdWords on your resume, like 1,000 other people who invented AdWords on their resume, and you never struggled, and it was fantastic, and you really have no idea what it's like to try to have to figure something out. And there's all kinds of people who you get overlooked, because you got the big venture capitalists on the board. The big venture capitalist, wants the big resume, and you want to please the venture capitalist. But a lot of times I've hired people who are like, look, this guy worked at this company. I haven't heard from it. He was the controller. I really like him. Boy, immigrant, came to this country, is really hardworking, trying to make something happen. I'm going to invest in this. This is the right person. And you know it when you know it. And I think one of the biggest things is your company starts working, and then all the resumes come at you, because it's, there's a crew of people in Silicon Valley who quite smartly just kind of move from one hot thing to the next. And that person is not the CEO, right? It's the junior. Like if you're a, biz dev person at whatever company, nobody cares if you leave, if you're the number 2 biz dev person,
Yep.
right? Like if Sheryl Sandberg leaves, it's an issue. If the second biz dev person goes from like Google to Facebook to Uber, and then all of a sudden these people wake up, by the way, and they've got like $30 million in, stock options from these last few things, that might not be the person who's going to help get your startup to the next level. So I guess my biggest thing is I look for people who've had, you know, companies that haven't necessarily made it.
Yeah. And essentially face some level of adversity in their careers and what they've done.
Yeah, and are basically good people. Like the range of competence is, it's not like incompetent people. Like the most amazing CFO in Silicon Valley and like the middle CFO in Silicon Valley aren't really that, don't commit fraud, like keep everything on track, report to the board, but get somebody who's not a jerk, who's a really good person to work with, who makes people feel good to come into work every day, and get 5 of those people working for you, 8, depending on what your management team is. And you'll be much better off than if you get the like, oh, this guy's, just a genius, general counsel.
How do you scope for that though, when a lot of startups also hire people who have some level of ambition, right? So even a founder has to be a certain level of insane to go do a founding company, but you still have to be some level of insane to say, I'm going to go not take the safe job at Google and instead go work for this no-name startup. And yeah, they just got a bunch of money from 8-Bit and other great VCs.
Right.
But even then it's a risk. And so I want I have some level of ambition that this is going to help my career. It's going to help train me. It's going to make me look good. Maybe I'll make a lot of money in my equity. Those people have then expectations, and not everyone can be a rock star at a company.
Yeah. I mean, you want to go to a company, and what you want to do is you want to go to a company that nobody's heard of, and then all of a sudden it becomes Zoom.
Sure.
Right. And you were there when it wasn't Zoom, and you were one of the guys who made it become that.
Right. You're every VC who's going to take credit for getting lucky and putting their money in there too.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so I think the right person comes on to a company, you haven't heard of it. It's called Zoom. What's weird. And you're like, damn it, I'm going to work so hard at my job because I think this CEO is a genius. I think that, and that's part of it. I think, Steve Jobs is amazing. I'm going to just nail the supply chain thing so much that I'm going to become so wealthy and this company's going to become so successful. That's the person you want. You do want that level of ambition. Yeah. That person doesn't need to be a jerk. That person's key attribute is probably that they're hardworking and persistent, not that they're smarter than everyone. Everyone's smarter than everyone else. Who cares? Like whatever. That they're really hardworking and they're a really good person that you want to work with for 5 to 10 years at that pace.
Yep.
That's what you're looking for, to me. And all this like, oh, this guy's smart. He's a genius. I don't know. I've met most people. They're not that smart. Like the smartest genius person really isn't a genius. So especially a good working, like hardworking, good person.
At the level we're probably all dealing with, where it's sort of tech startups in the pool of applicants you're already pulling from is already going to be at that smart level, almost by default, I'd say. So then within that range, no one's going to be that much smarter. I think I agree with you. It comes down to how hard are they willing to work and how much are they willing to just say, I'm going to go figure it out and get it done. Attitude versus like, oh, like I need X, Y, and Z handed to me. Like I can't get my job done because this person didn't do their job. Like, no, like figure it out.
Yeah, it's good people with good judgment who work well together. And that's like the great. And now when you get really like, there's a whole different thing that happens when you get way, way up to the top. You want to hire someone like Ruth Porat to be your CFO at Google because it really is a unusual beast that generates $500 million a day. But guess what? That's not your startup. Exactly. So, but for us, we do seed stage investing. So for us, it's mostly, look, get yourself to a point. A lot of people have figured out how to manage companies. Not that many people have figured out how to make a product that everyone in the world loves. And so if you can get that right, if you can get that going, that's incredible. And that's why we do this in Silicon Valley, because you can invest in a company that's worth $10 million. People love the product, and all of a sudden the company's worth $10 billion.
Yeah.
And that's, it doesn't happen a lot of places in the world.
No, it's pretty amazing. And it's not just what's amazing about it isn't, and I think a lot of people miss this fact. I personally think that like, oh wow, it's worth $10 billion. And now the founders are billionaires themselves. I'm like, that's cool, but that's actually not the metric that matters. What matters is the company's worth $10 billion because they built something that was so valuable to all their customers that didn't exist before. That is
Yeah.
amazing. That is the
Yeah.
coolest part. Like, sure, outcome, you can measure it by
Yeah.
the amount of money they're worth, but like the cool
Yeah.
thing is they have hundreds of thousands or millions of customers who utterly love their product.
It's
That's
ridiculous. This whole thing is insane, by the way. If you go anywhere in the world, and I've run businesses, and you kind of go to the startup community in Dublin or Singapore or Mexico City or whatever it is, and you forget that in Silicon Valley, you'll just be talking to somebody. They're like, "Yeah, I'm doing this thing. I think if we get it right and we apply the AI, we'll cure cancer." And you're like, okay, like maybe you might. Anywhere else in the world, people are like, "Are you out of your damn mind? Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about leaving your job at IBM or what, safe place to go start a thing that helps people do this other, like, it's freaking insane." And you get in Silicon Valley, you go, "Yeah, I guess that could work. Here's $2 million, go do it."
So how do you judge? I mean, how do you, maybe you and Jonathan, right? Your partnership for this who don't know, Jonathan is Kent's partner at 8-Bit, both amazing entrepreneurs. How do you try to judge that, right? So when you think about like excellent entrepreneurs, and presumably you're trying, there's lots of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and in the world who are trying to change the world.
Yeah.
There's only so many who are going to get invested by great VCs, and even a small percentage of those are going to be successful. Now you want to optimize as the VC. You want to make the best choices you can to have a higher, better outcome in return.
Yeah.
What are the qualities you're looking for to try to identify a great entrepreneur?
Yeah. So my partner, Jonathan Abrams, he's that guy. He's the entrepreneur. He's the guy who invents things that millions of people love, tens of millions of people love. That's what he does. And I'm the other guy. And so as we build a venture firm, 8-Bit Capital, it's not Andreessen, right? It's Andreessen Horowitz. It's two different guys. And so his background's in engineering. He's the actual founder. He's the actual inventor. And so it's the two of us coming to the entrepreneur, but we've both been entrepreneurs for 20 years. And so the things that I think, I know that we look for, the first thing is the market, which you'd be surprised by the number of entrepreneurs who come to us and they're building something in a market where you go, I don't think there's going to be $10 billion companies in that market. Yeah. And even if you own that market, even if you own the market for, connecting high school coaches to students who want extra coaching or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's just not going to be that big. I would say 90% of what we see falls into that category. And so the first thing we want is somebody working in a market where it's like, look, if you're the number 5 company, after Adobe, after Figma, after Canva, you can still be worth $5 billion. That's where we want to start.
Yep.
And then the second piece we want your story to make sense, right? Like, why are you doing this? You went to Stanford, you worked at Facebook, and now you're going to try your hand at it. You came up with some idea and you picked 10, maybe. Mm-hmm. Or are you the guy, use Zoom as an example, right? You're working at WebEx. You know what all the problems are. You know you can do it 10 times better. You know where the hole in the market is, and you're leaving to start that company. And that's just, it doesn't
even
have to
then
be
with Zoom, right? I mean, even Zoom, if I recall with his story, right? A lot of people didn't put money into them because they just figured like WebEx had already solved the problem. And Google and Microsoft and all the others were going to have their own products. So why would a third party client make sense?
Right.
And yet,
100%. And then, the guy had an accent and, kind of old, right? He was in his mid 40s. Everything about it was wrong, except for the one thing, which was it wasn't right. But that story kind of, if you listened, and the guys who invested, like, Dan Scheinman and then, Maven Ventures, I think was the first VC in, they kind of understood who the guy was. I think they'd worked with him. They're like, he's an amazing guy. He sees something about the market from the exact place you would see that thing, and off you go, and there it is. And so that's a lot of it. And it's stories like, hey, I worked at this security company, they got acquired. I really want to build this thing that we were going to build. And then, by the way, everybody at the security company is like, that's the best guy we ever hired. And the story starts coming together, and you're like, that makes sense. And then the final piece, and this is where being entrepreneurs for 20 years makes a difference, is just that intangible thing, that grit, craziness, but you can't be too crazy because then you're just crazy. It's understand. And that's the thing where the two of us come together and go, I think she's got that. Jonathan was one of the first investors in Front, which is this company that's, I think Sequoia led the Series B, then preempted the Series C, doing great. And the woman who started it was like a waitress from Paris, right? And so we're not going around looking for people who are waitresses in Paris. But when Jonathan met her, here's Mathilde, he was like, she's got that thing. It's just that thing. And I know that's a terrible answer for people, because how do you prove to people you have that thing? But when you see hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs, you kind of know what it is. It's just this thing. And probably the closest thing to it, the closest word for what that thing is kind of grit. Because in venture, you want somebody who's going to build something. In venture, if you build a $50 million company and you sell it and you have $15 million, that's a huge success for the entrepreneur. It's crappy VC investment. Okay. And so you need somebody who's so intense and so, I hate to say the word crazy, but just has that thing where they want to keep going until it's, the thing, basically.
I feel like I've seen that a few of the investments that I've been lucky enough to make, where you have these founders who, grit is a good way to put it, but I think it's also just a level of dedication that's just sort of obvious. So one of the investments I made recently, the founder, every time I would meet him, he would like break out his laptop and do demos. And this wouldn't be not just to me necessarily to pitch me. It would literally be, he was at a party at my house and he just started talking. The first conversation, we just started talking about his product, because he can't even talk about anything else. All he's thinking about is his product. And the next thing you know, he's breaking out his laptop and doing a demo at a party on Friday night of his product. And I'm like, you're the person I want to invest in, because this is all you think about. Whereas most founders are, it's a lot of what they think about, but it's like their job. It's not.
That's exactly right. I mean, I have a thing, we take, you're talking to an entrepreneur, you're taking notes. And there's a few, we had one recently where somebody's going to go after go after Workday, if you can believe it, and knock them out. And, you kind of start writing down what you're saying.
I think it was my former co-founder. So I know.
Yeah. Okay. And so you start writing, and all of a sudden you're like, you throw it, you just stop taking notes, because you're like, I don't know what this person's talking about, but this person understands everything. Like, they are so far beyond me in understanding the problems in the thing. And you bring up, what about this competitor? And they've got 32 issues of like that kind of thing. And, you do that 30 times and 8 of them are still going to fail. But at the minute we invest, both of us, me from my background, Jonathan from his background, the market is massive. The story just makes a ton of sense. It's the guy with diabetes who sold his last company for $500,000, who's going to build a platform to solve this problem with disease. And the person is just amazing. You just know they're going to be able to raise capital from other people. And even a third of those will still fail. But, when they win, they're worth $10 billion. And that's insane.
Yeah, it is insane. And to be part of those journeys is one of those privileges that I actually love about Silicon Valley, is not only the opportunity that I've had to go build things and fail, but also the opportunity to be part of these companies where, man, I actually feel somewhat guilty sometimes. I'm like, I invested early in you and you did all the work. And now my stake is worth 10 to 20x what it was because you did all the work. And I just happen to be lucky enough to have capital to put into you. But yes, I made the right bet. And I made some of these bets before anyone else would, because other people didn't see it. And my small bet then enabled them to get a few more small bets, money in, and then that led to everything else taking off.
Yeah, I mean, look, you should never complain about being a venture capital, although many venture capitalists do, right? They're like never making enough money or whatever. You're like, what the hell are you talking about? It's like, well, you're comparing yourself to like Mark Zuckerberg or whatever, who's worth billions of dollars. And it's true. Look, the best thing, the most satisfying thing is being an entrepreneur when everything's working. When you've worked hard and you've figured it out and it's just clicking, that is pretty spectacular. That's pretty great. But, being a venture capitalist who gets to participate in 30 things such that, one day you're like, man, this company, I love the entrepreneur, they're just having a hard time. I don't know how they're going to make it happen. And then the next company calls you up and says, hey, we just hit this milestone. And by the way, so-and-so from XYZ firm is going to put $10 million in. And emotionally, that is a much, mellower roller coaster than what an entrepreneur is going through. So if you ever hear us saying we've got a harder job than, an entrepreneur, no.
I'll be playing the smallest violin for you.
Being an entrepreneur is you shouldn't do it. It's the hardest thing in the world. But if you've got to do it, we've got all the respect in the world for you.
And actually on that note, I mean, I would a little bit actually push back on the idea that if everything's going well, that's like the ideal scenario. In fact, part of what I love about being an entrepreneur, and I mean, I have the privilege of also investing it as well, but it really being an entrepreneur is my main focus, main day job. It's always interesting. And the same with being a VC, of course, but like there's always something new that I'm dealing with. And if everything is working perfectly, I'm going to be freaking out. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Something's, it's too good. What shoe's going to
Yeah.
drop tomorrow? Because maybe that's just my own, anxiety as an entrepreneur.
I mean, people care about, look, the most difficult thing is nobody cares about your product. Not really. You got a couple friends to use it who work at some company, but if you were being honest with yourself, you just haven't gotten there yet, and you're running out of money, and you've got 5 people and you've got 8 months, and that's just brutal.
Yeah.
If you've got like people are using your product, and you've got problems, like, oh, the servers are melting because so many people are using the product, or whatever, I need to hire that next level up salesperson because we're growing quickly. That's great. But the thing where it's just kind of not going anywhere, it's brutal.
So how did this may be a good segue to talk through like Friendster and Nuzzle, right? Because both of those sort of had really high arcs into the sky and kind of right back down in the roller coaster too. What was that like? And what was sort of some of the lessons you could take away?
Well, I mean, look, Friendster was Jonathan. Jonathan invented social networking, basically. That was him in a time, and the interesting thing about that is this was a time, let's say 2002 or so, when the internet was over. Like, you thought Web3 disappeared from a lot of VC websites in the last year? Like, people were taking internet off their websites if you were a venture capital
Crazy
firm.
to think about.
You could credibly say to somebody, oh, I think everything is going to happen on the internet. It's already been invented. We tried the pet food thing. Is Amazon going anywhere? I don't know.
Yep.
That was the nuclear winter that Jonathan sat down in his bedroom and coded up the first social network. And it just exploded. Like, it took off. It grew faster than anything had ever grown in history on the internet, and then by extension, probably anywhere. And, he filed the patent. Facebook owns that patent now. And it was just, basically a rocket ship. But there were kind of 2 things that happened, without getting into too much detail. One was Jonathan got replaced. And this was before probably what led to the Mark Andreessen idea that, hey, you really don't want to replace founders, and we're founder friendly.
Yeah.
At the time, the VC had this kind of macho, like, oh, now that it's a real business, step aside, junior, we're going to bring in real management.
I mean, they did that to Google too, right? I mean, Google, essentially the same thing happened. I mean, obviously the founder stayed more involved, but they did the same thing to Google.
They tried. Oh, I think they tried to get rid of those guys. And had Mark Zuckerberg not observed what happened at Friendster, he knew very well, what happened, and set the board up in such a way that he couldn't be fired, I think there's virtually no chance he wouldn't have been fired.
Yeah.
And there's almost no chance that whoever he hired wouldn't have taken the $1 billion from Yahoo and, so forth and so on. And you never would have Facebook, this $1 trillion outcome. So that was the main thing that happened was Friendster was a rocket ship every second that Jonathan was in charge of it. So that was kind of the first thing. Founder got replaced, never got the footing back. Basically, to that thing, whereas if your management team doesn't gel, it's kind of hard to get it on the second try. And then the other thing was that, being the first is kind of tough. Like, you look at the history of who the real winner is, and a lot of times it's not the first one. And the problem is you have so much blue sky that you don't really know. Like, was the thing to be like Facebook, which was this kind of, everybody had a real identity? That was certainly Jonathan's initial vision. Or is it MySpace? Is it a crazy media-centric thing?
Yeah.
And maybe it is MySpace. Maybe all these years later, what's TikTok? But, a bunch of crazy videos and things that you watch endlessly. And so I think when you can come in to the second position, especially when frankly, the first entrant's not just killing it, and you can kind of go, okay, I can avoid those 7. It's like playing a video game the third time. Like, how to get through the first 2 levels, and you can focus on the next level. I think that's a little bit what happened with Friendster.
How do you make that decision as a founder or as an investor, in the sense, like, do you want to wait? Like, I think Google is a good example of that too, right? There are a lot of search engines before Google, and yet Google is the one that obviously became dominant and won. How do you make that decision as an investor, saying, like, because you also want to invest in that company that's doing it first, because they can also own the market, right? Amazon kind of showed that, right? Amazon was
Yeah.
kind of the first to really make online shopping a thing, and
Yeah.
look where they are.
That's the trick. That's why everyone's not a venture investor. But I think the lesson that we take away from that is two things. It's all over. Everything's been invented. There's no more SaaS products to be invented. Just remember 2002. Everything that's been invented on the internet's been invented.
Yeah.
Like that's one. Like if you're a venture capitalist, never have that point of view. And then the other thing is be careful. This is a really tricky one, but the market's too crowded, right? There's already a WebEx and a Google, video and all that. And yet how many billions of dollars is Zoom?
Yep.
And, Canva, come on, there's already an Adobe and there's already a Figma. And so you've got to be really open to, you might be investing in the first thing to ever open up a category, and you need to keep your mind open to that, right? There was no Friendster before Friendster. There was no Uber. Nobody was looking for an Uber before there was an Uber, right? That didn't get invested in by some mobility fund. But also be careful about it's over.
Yeah.
Maybe Google, maybe search is over, but in almost any other market, there's always somebody who's ready to and the funny thing now is you're at a point where companies like Workday have been around for 20 years. Like what you think is the upstart and the new company is actually kind of an older company. And by the way, now you've got AI native companies coming up. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these companies that you think of as the upstarts are gone in 5 to 10 years.
100%. There's always that turnover, which is a wonderful thing about capitalism in a sense. It's the new can replace the old and provide something better. What advice then for entrepreneurs would you give, right? So to say does it matter if your market is super crowded? If you believe that there is a market of one for the product you're building, even though there are 5 other or 10 other competitors, does it matter? It just follow what you really believe is an opportunity in the world, and the rest will work itself out. I mean, just once again, Eric from Zoom, I think it was Eric.
Yeah, I mean, this is where, one of the things that we really appreciate entrepreneurs is you've got to be in the market working on your product with customers as quickly as you possibly can. Because the more time you spend in your private beta and stealth and all that, you're really not learning anything.
100%.
And so whatever thesis you have, Reid Hoffman said this forever, get it into the market as quickly as possible and find out if it's at all true.
Mm-hmm.
And sitting there thinking it through, how can you beat Zoom and why can you beat Zoom and all, or why can Zoom beat WebEx or whatever? You've just got to get it out in the market and say, look, here's 5 people who are using my product because the video never drops. Or because the interface is easier, or whatever it is. It's that. Or if you don't have a product yet, you just have a story, make sure the story really makes sense. Can you explain to me why you're going to disrupt the HR market?
Yep.
And maybe you can. But that's, that's the thing. You listen to 100 entrepreneurs and 95 of their stories, you're like, no, I don't feel it. I don't see it. And then 5 of them, you're like, I don't know if that's going to work, but I understand what that person thinks they see.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And then, so what did you see? So that was sort of the Friendster story to some extent was, hey, the founder was replaced. Well, I want to ask a question, but maybe it's good to wait till after the Nuzzle story too.
Yeah.
But what about boards are good and bad? And this is, we're recording this slightly after all the OpenAI stuff. So it's maybe a good example of how bad boards can be.
There you go.
I've actually seen it in so many other companies that I've worked with and been a part of. You can have boards that can utterly destroy a company. And theoretically, the board is supposed to be the adults in the room. And instead they are the ones who destroy it, or they're not paying enough attention and let the founders destroy it. Because maybe the founders do need some guidance and they just they're being too founder friendly and letting the founders destroy their own company.
Yeah. Boards need to be led. Well, start with the seed stage. So we don't take board seats or think a seed stage company needs a board, right? Because the only thing the board's going to do at the seed stage is fire the CEO. And if that's what needs to happen, you're screwed anyway. So we don't take board seats. We don't think it does anything. It's just performative. You can do it. It's not terrible. And we will take a board seat if you really want to have a board at the seed stage. But for God's sake, go figure something out first before anybody cares. Don't build a board around something nobody cares about yet. No customer cares about. But look, at the later stages, a board, you will hear over drinks in Silicon Valley, I've heard very, very famous VCs say things like 80% of boards cause damage to their companies, 15% do nothing, and 5% add value. And so everybody wants to tell the narrative that the board's adding all kinds of value. I told them to add a zero. I came in and said, why don't we, I don't know. I mean, people just want to write themselves in the narrative. Like, why? Like, if you invested in Uber at the seed stage, good for you. Like, you made your LPs a ton of money, go do it again.
Yeah.
Who cares nobody does this. Like, you don't go invest in Apple and be like, well, I told Steve Jobs, he's like, I bought Apple stock when it was $2 and now it's 500.
Yep.
I'm a genius. So, so the issue with boards is they're stocked with people who have a million different things they're trying to accomplish, one of which may be helping your company. And they have 30 other companies or 50 other companies or whatever. And so they'll push your company to do either crazy things that it shouldn't do, things that have to do with their agenda. Maybe they just came back from some conference in China and they want to know what your strategy is for China or whatever it is. And maybe the success of your company is like number 3 or 4 on their list.
Yep.
And so it's a problem. And so staying in control of your board, see Facebook, is probably a pretty smart thing to do, or at a minimum, manage your board. Like, make sure you're leading your board, telling your board what to do. But a board is not there to you're not unless you are in an incubator, you're not there to have the board guide you or tell you what to do or anything like that. The board's there to, provide oversight, have an audit committee, but, a great leader is leading the board.
So then,
Steve,
what is then how should an entrepreneur consider that or think about leading the board, especially if you haven't done that before? Like, what does that look like? Even once again, using a very recent example with OpenAI, Sam Altman, who I think most people would say is one of the top tier leaders out there today.
Yeah.
He clearly didn't actually manage his board. He lost control of it, kind of took it for granted, and it utterly came close to destroying billions and billions of dollars in value. I messed that up. So how can an entrepreneur who's never run any company before, let alone had millions of dollars from a VC in their bank account, also then figure out how to get a board who's going to be in either that 5% that actually be helpful, or even the 15% that just does no harm?
Yeah. I mean, the OpenAI thing is a crazy story, but was probably like some philosophical battle, which is itself a problem, right? Like, there was I forget the name of the company. There's an early competitor to Facebook that came out and offered. So when Facebook came out on like the Harvard campus, it immediately went to like 95% of students were using it within 2 days, et cetera. And there was another one that did the same thing, started at Stanford. I think it was called InCircle. Same thing. And within 2 days, 95% of Stanford's using it. And they're like, great, we're going to package this up as a software and go around and sell it to universities, right? And that didn't work. You can imagine a board having a debate. Hey, this thing's really working. Should we sell this software as a package, or should we, create a social network like Facebook, basically? And you can get bogged down in that. And then if you decide, so that's kind of like how a board can think. So you need to be an entrepreneur who's powerful enough to say, no, my vision is that we're actually going to create a social network and it's going to be free, but we're eventually going to make money on advertising. So your first board member is probably going to be whoever invests in you. And then the trick there is just if you have, and you might not have an option, right? Only one person might want to invest in you. So I think the first piece is, okay, if you've got 3 or 4 different offers from if you're lucky enough to have 3 or 4 different offers for Series A, and that's probably where a board member is going to come on, really go talk to other people, talk to other founders and find out that guy was a jerk, terrible to work with, or she's fantastic, I would love to have her, and take whichever one's the best. Don't worry about valuation. Yeah. That's the first step. But the second step is just be on top of your board, be so successful and so clear about what you want to accomplish that your board kind of comes into the situation, when they're in a board meeting, they realize they're not really being asked for much. They're being told what's going on. Things are going really well, and they can just kind of check the box and walk away. Yep. And a lot of it's just having that attitude of, look, I'm the CEO, I'm running this company. Here's what we are doing. I want a tiny bit of your thoughts on this tiny little thing, but this is not an open discussion about what we're doing at this company up until, you fire me, which I know sounds a little cavalier, but that's that's essentially it.
And the crazy part though is even when they get fired is, example with Princer still being a good applicable one, even firing doesn't, that's where these boards make these mistakes. They actually think that's going to change things. Like, hey, you have a vision, follow your vision, go after it. It's still likely to fail. Doesn't matter if your vision's or it's the board's vision. It doesn't matter all that much. You just have to pick a direction, move quickly, and that will lead to an outcome. Maybe it leads to failing faster, which maybe isn't a bad thing either, and just move on.
Yeah. And look, there's cases where the CEO replacement, and look, 9 times out of 10, if things are going really well, if you keep good relations with your board, maybe 8 times out of 10, you're going to survive it. But it is something, as you're a CEO of something that's successful, keeping an eye on it and just understanding that you're the sucker in the room, right? They're on 10 boards and they've been on 100, and they know all the tricks and they know all the things and you don't. And just knowing that if you've built a company, you're smart enough to know they may or may not be on your side, and spend some time thinking it through with other trusted founders. Like, what's this guy trying to do? What's this guy trying to do? What do I need to do to, achieve what I want with the company? But, be careful.
Basically,
like boards aren't your friends unless you, put all your friends on the board.
You have to remember, I guess, board members have a very different agenda in many cases for what they're looking for, and the returns they're looking for, and the outcomes might be opposed to what you're looking for as a founder and the mission you're trying to accomplish.
Well, okay, so there's that dynamic is a really tough one. You've talked to all kinds of founders who built the company, especially if it's a very successful. This is actually correlated with probably the top VCs, because they don't need small wins, they need big wins. And so you will talk to any number of entrepreneurs who had an offer for $150 million for their company, which, they would have made $37 million or whatever it is. Like, that's it. Fantastic. And the board didn't let them do it. And because the board's like, well, for us, it doesn't make a big difference. We'd rather go for $10 billion or zero, where you could have had $37 million. And that's a dynamic where, you've heard that innumerable times that's happened. And the problem is, the one time that Mark Zuckerberg did it and said no to $1 billion offer to Yahoo, it actually was the right move. Yeah. And that screws everybody up.
Right. But reality is that's not the case. And to essentially every single founder, $37 million is a life-changing amount of money. And to the VC, they're one of dozens of bets. And so it doesn't.
Yeah, I think those are the things to remember, is that the VCs have all kinds of different agendas, none of which is that hard to figure out. Like, if you're a smart founder, you can probably figure out what they're trying, how their economics work. If you're a junior associate at a big firm, you're more inclined to try to do something on the board, right? So you can tell people, I did this and I did that, right? So you got to that's managing the ego. You can kind of figure that out, and then figure out that what they're trying to do is create, swing for the fences or get a zero, whereas you might be trying to do something more in the middle. But I think you can kind of figure out the dynamic. I think the main thing to do is just understand that they're not just your buddies, and you're not an incubator looking for advice from your board. You're leading your board. Yeah. And if you're leading your board and telling them what to do and doing a good job, and you have relatively good board members, they should probably just be happy with that. Say, this is great. I don't have to worry about this company. Every time I come in, this woman's telling me, giving me the data. I'm not getting surprised.
Is it almost like to me, in some ways, being a good managing your board is actually just the same way as we would be fundraising. What I mean by that is, just like you like to invest in the founders who really know their market well and understand the nuances, I would want companies that I was a board member of, I would want those founders, if they come in and say, if they have all the answers, they've thought through all the angles, and they write a really good board deck explaining it, I'm like, great. You're on top of it. I'm not going to be able to sit here and for 20 minutes be on my high horse and tell you what's better or worse. You have the details. I trust you that you're making the best decisions with the information you have, and you have way more information than I have. So go do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, look, we are not an incubator, right? So we will help companies out, but all the way up, you have capital and you have a vision and you're building it. If at any point you're really relying on your investors to do anything, hire people or advise you, they should help you out. Just like if you're a good founder, you should ask every human for 3 contacts who will buy your product. Of course, they should help you that way. But if they're not running the company, either making strategic decisions or tactical decisions or anything along those lines. So, you should be in the position of, I am the alpha dog running my company with my amazing vision. If you need any advice on anything, the odds that that person's on your board are pretty low, right? This is Silicon Valley. Do you want to talk to the best salesperson in enterprise software? That guy will talk to you. Like, that guy will talk to you. You can find him or her or whoever it is. You want to talk to the best HR person who understands how to manage remote teams? That person will talk to you in Silicon Valley. The person on your board,
Do you then, maybe the last question on the board stuff, I want to make sure we're cognizant of the time too, but do you recommend that founders interview their board members before they let them on the board? Like, let's say, okay, you're taking an investment from a big firm, Andreessen Horowitz or something, great. They're giving you a lot of money, they want a board seat. Do you suggest interviewing various people from Andreessen, saying like, I actually want this person versus this person, or just saying whoever they...
I don't know how much control you have over that. I mean, we did have an issue where we had a board member and we got swapped out, right? Famous VC came on the board, and then, the other person's there. Man, that's difficult, right? Because what are you can't complain, right? It's another person. They're probably, but that definitely happens. I think there's only so much you can do. I think you can roughly say, okay, this person's coming on my board. We're going to invest. I'm going to be on the board. Does it make sense? Like, probably the guy who's investing, the woman who's investing in your company is going to be on your board. And then, so there is a risk that they'll get swapped out. I don't think that's a huge risk. And then it's a matter of just talking to their other founders, and you'll get a sense. You'll get like
you're hiring someone. Like, do your diligence.
Yeah, they'll be like, you know what, that person's fantastic. I couldn't have had a better board. You'll get that body language, or you'll get like, well, you got to watch out, for this or that, the other thing. And then it just depends on, what your options are. I would say, I'll leave you with the message on that one is valuation within a range doesn't matter compared to a good board member. So if you have a $40 million valuation from a good board member and $60 million from a questionable one, take the good board member. Yeah. The whole thing comes down to whether your company succeeds or not.
Right.
The percentages are secondary.
Yeah. No, it's mostly a binary outcome outside of the multi-billion dollar versus, the few $100 million outcome, but it's still mostly binary.
Right.
And okay, so going back to that's the Frencher stuff, bad situation, board, got rid of Jonathan, big mistake. Then Nuzzle, right? And I will say for people who don't know Nuzzle, it was this aggregator of news, basically, but from calling in all the information that your friends were posting on Twitter, things like that, so sort of using the crowd to help source the right content. And me as a news junkie and someone who just like loves reading, I loved it because I was always finding this amazing, cool, interesting articles to read and help keep me, I think, better at my job and in a better entrepreneur and better founder, because I could read some of the best content that was out there and it was surfaced really well. But so Jonathan goes and starts that, and it also, I think, had sort of a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah, completely different situation there. One lesson, again, Jonathan, the founder, inventor, invents this thing called Nuzzle. It's hard to describe, but it just gives you the news it gives you is perfect. It's exactly what you're interested in. And you would give this app to somebody who was like a school teacher in a union in Vermont, and they'd be like, this is amazing. This is the most comprehensive school teacher in Vermont union information news I've ever seen. And it worked because basically your friends have similar interests and whatever. Mm-hmm. And when Jonathan started that company, what he did, here's a lesson. He gave it to all his friends to try. Hasn't to raise money, gives it to all his friends to try. And they're all like, yeah, we love it, which is what your friends will always say. Love it, use it all the time. But what he did was a couple weeks later, he goes back and looks at the database,
see who's actually
where you find out that your friends really aren't using it all the time, right? Well, sure enough, people were. They were using it all the time, every day, that thing. And so he went and raised money. And people loved the app. It grew to like a couple 100,000, which is, here's where your problem starts. People loved it. Every metric, I'd be sad if it was gone. I would pay for it. I use it every day. It was great. The issue was it was in the news space. It's just a terrible space. Yeah. See my previous comments about make sure the market's really big. Even if you're the best news app, what is the most, valued news app in the world? I mean, and then by the way, most people are happy using Apple. So that was a problem. And the other problem was there was probably 200,000 or 300,000 people in the world who wanted it. There weren't 20 million.
Right. There aren't that many news junkies like myself who care about it.
And there was nothing about it that was at all viral. It worked great in single player mode. So there's nothing about it that was viral. You didn't need to really invite anybody or anything. So none of those metrics were in. So we tried mightily for a while, and it just didn't work. And so the lesson there is, I think, that's a really weird one, because it did have product market fit, but there are product markets that just aren't huge.
Yeah.
And boy, do we avoid spaces like news or, things where even if you're the dominant player, you're not, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
This is kind of our takeaway from that.
And so what does that lead to now when you think through, once again, being a great entrepreneur? Are there certain characteristics that you go back to? So it's one's market is a big one. Two, it's sort of that dedication, mentality, and sort of grit piece.
Yeah.
What other elements? I mean, you talked a little bit about telling a story. That's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, but do you want to dig into that a little bit more about, like, what does it mean to tell a really good story? What does that imply as a founder? And should that be a skill set that every founder?
What's your concern with? Is it that people are good storytellers but don't actually do anything?
No, actually, I think it's the opposite. I think, frankly, if you're a good storyteller, it implies you are going to be really good at as an entrepreneur. I actually think being great at storytelling implies you know how to explain your product to different buyers of it, right? That could be venture capitalists, it could be employees, it could be customers, and you need to have all those, and you need to know the story and the nuances to tell that story well. And if you're unable to do that, it maybe means you don't have a very clear articulation of what your product is, in which case you won't achieve any great outcome.
Yeah, it's a really big deal. So we do being able to tell a story. So we do seed stage investing. And so a big metric for us, a big milestone, is that they raise a Series A. And sometimes you raise a Series A round. It's a very difficult thing to do, because you've got to say, look, I spent 18 months and here's what I have to show for it. Sometimes you do it because you're hitting metric. People are signing up. There's a wait list. The luckiest case, our revenue is growing 50% a month. It's amazing. But sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just haven't gotten there in 18 months. And we've been surprised by the number of companies that nevertheless raise money. And it's because the founder is a good storyteller. They're compelling, they're charismatic. They say, look, after 18 months, I learned something. I knew there was a market here, but the market I found right next to it is incredible. Like, I was drilling for oil and I found gold instead. It's amazing. And there's 10 times as much gold as there ever was oil, whatever the story is. And that really works. And one of the things that we know and, come to recognize even more is it really is important that you continue to raise capital if you're building a company. And having the ability to persuade a venture capitalist to give you money is a very particular skill set. And so we definitely do look for that, in a founder, somebody who knows that they're selling and have to constantly raise capital, have to constantly hire people, have to constantly persuade customers, is actually pretty important. The other person, the person you don't want to be, is the person who thinks they're going to build such an amazing product that none of the rest of it matters. Like, that can happen, right? Like Friendster growing, 1,000% a week, doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. It's like, that's a winner. But if you're not in that state, some form of saying to people, look, I know now nobody cares about $1.2 million in revenue, but look over the horizon with me. That's a huge skill for people to have.
Do you think, I can imagine people listening to this might be really bothered by that statement to some extent, because it sort of implies you have to be telling a good story is sometimes about telling about the future, which is a little bit of BS. You don't really know what the future is going to be. You're making it up. You're telling a story. So that probably bothers people, especially people who might be this amazing engineer who might have amazing technical skills, but don't have those the presenting skills. Like, how do you train people to do that? Or does just you have it or you don't?
I think, so first on whether that's fair or not, that is the game, right? Like, the Silicon Valley game is, you go to a guy, the flip side is this, you go to somebody, you tell a story, and they give you $10 million. That's pretty cool, right? Like,
you probably couldn't go. When you're a founder, you have no money in the bank at all, and then suddenly someone wires you $10 million. It's one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had.
Yeah. Go to a bank and ask them for $10 million and see, see how that goes.
They'll laugh you out the door.
Exactly. And so, you do have to be able to tell a story, but if you can tell a story, you get $10 million. That's kind of a good gig. I think it can both be taught. Some people just have it, right? Adam Newman at, WeWork I mean,
Conrad Parker, I know you've interviewed him, right, from Rippling.
yes.
He's an amazing storyteller, an amazing
Yeah.
fundraiser.
100%. And you feel it. And when you're in a room with that person, you're like, I want to invest. I want it. Like you get that thing. Like oh my God, I want to invest in this person. So there's that. I think you can learn it too, but you have to respect it, right? You can't be like, this is stupid, but I'm going to learn it. You've got to be like, I get that that's the game, and I'm going to go learn how to do it. I'm going to go watch Steve Jobs give a speech on video and understand what that is. Just saying, hey, there's 3 things you have to understand if you understand however that works. So I think I hate when people say, yeah, you have to be born with it. You can't learn it. I think you can learn it, but you have to respect it. Be like, I know that this is important. Not like, oh, I've got to do this to get ahead.
Yeah.
And then, there's any number of people. I mean, Steve Jobs taught himself how to do that, right? Like he went and, I don't know, he studied Shakespeare, whatever it was to do it. You can do it too.
Yeah. And are there so I have a thesis actually about storytelling, which is a little bit, it sort of compounds on itself. What I mean by that is if you're good at storytelling, you can, of course, convince VCs to give you some money, but then you need to turn around and tell that same story to teammates to bring on that team, and then tell that same story to customers who will buy it. And then that feeds into your ability to do your next round of fundraising, because now you can come back 18 months later with all the progress that you've made.
Yeah.
You've made that progress because of the stories you've told.
Yeah. They're different stories. Like that's the biggest thing we run into, is that they're different stories. And so the classic thing we get is a person who has a product and they're like, here's what's wrong with Salesforce, whatever. Here's what's wrong with Salesforce. There's 30 things, and here's my vision. This product's better. And like, there's a beautiful product vision, and they're great at it. And they bring that to the VC, and you sit in a meeting with a Series A investor who are like the lowest attention span people you've ever met. You heard it all, cynical, blah, blah, blah. And they're talking about their product, 6 slides in. They don't really care about your product. You're not thinking like a VC anymore. The guy who's a CTO is about to hire your product to make his organization more efficient, cares about your product. The VC wants to make $1 billion, right? So they don't want to hear about, okay, great, your product. Oh, do you want to see my product? No, it just looks like everything looks like everything else. You need to spin a tale for them about why you're going to be worth $1 billion. Yeah. Why Workday, which is worth, Canva's worth $40 billion, and what I'm building is going to blow them away. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, now they're leaning forward. Yep. How are you going to do that? Yeah. We're going to be worth more than Canva. Okay, the house in Napa needs a couple,
so you got right. New wine. You need the Scream Eagle wine or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's the biggest mistake we see. You're a good storyteller. You got to remember that you got different audiences. And that's why everybody gets so, kind of enraged by Adam Neumann, is like, he was spinning a story that people are like, I don't get it. But he was spinning it to people who sort of had unlimited money, who were looking for something crazy. Like, none of his investors were like, oh, I need to invest in real estate that's going to grow 8% a year. They're like, I want to give you $1 billion. It's either going to turn to 100 or 0. Yeah. That's what they wanted. And he was selling that to them. Like, you shouldn't have invested in that. But that's what those guys wanted to do. And none of the investors in WeWork have gone out of business because they put money in WeWork.
Yep. It's a great point. And actually, I learned that lesson the hard way, where I was presenting to a really well-known investor for one of my companies. And at the end of the day, we got denied. He didn't invest. And what he basically said is, you didn't make the hair at the back of my neck stand on end. Basically, right. He wanted to hear the story about why this is going to change the world. And right. I didn't tell him that story. And that was a lesson there. And as an investor, I want to hear that story. Why is this going to be massive and utterly change things that no one else can see? Like, you're such a passionate founder. You can see 20 steps ahead and see how this will change the world, and own a huge amount of that market, and own it because it's so much better, and it makes for people will buy it.
Right, because they're discounting it 90%. And so you think, like, everyone who listened to Adam Neumann wasn't like, oh, I think everyone in the world is going to be, riding wave riders and whatever his surfing thing around the world was. But they were like, and it ended up worse than this, but they're like, man, if this guy does 10% of what he's saying, it'll be worth da. And so, I mean, look, and if you're not that guy, you're not that guy. Yep. If you're not that, woman, you're not gonna, if you're not a hyperbolic person, you can also be like the Zoom founder he was like, here's my vision. He wasn't, with the hair and the whole thing, But he's like, here's my vision and I'm going to blow all these other guys away. And you listen to him and you're like, oh, that guy's serious.
Yeah.
Like,
But
so there's different ways to do it. You can't not be yourself. But when you're talking to the VC, you're selling a big vision. When you're talking to a customer, you're selling, increase revenue, decrease costs,
Mhm.
make your life easier. They're just different pitches.
So sort of what you're saying in a sense, know your audience and then
Yeah.
craft a story for that audience.
And the biggest thing we see with entrepreneurs is that they are trying to get VCs to appreciate their product. Like they'll show you the product and you think your product it just looks like a spreadsheet, like with buttons, and it looks good. Unless your product really has some like wow factor, which you do get with AI sometimes, right? Where you're like, here, enter a picture and tell it to do something, and you do. We invested in a company where, they are trying to be a Canva killer, and the entrepreneur was like, let's do the pitch in my product.
Yeah.
Like,
Smart.
let's not go on Zoom. Like, let's get on my product across the world. And are you good at building like digital assets for advertising? Why don't you try to build one? Here, we'll do it together. And I was like, wow, I don't know. I just did build an advertising campaign, a beautiful image. So you may have a product that's like that.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing we see is entrepreneurs who are trying to tell the VC the customer story. You should tell the VC story.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And so when you think through the arc of the founders you've worked with, the entrepreneurs you've invested in, everything else, what are like one or two key characteristics that you take away? If you think through all the specific folks you worked with and taken away, what are the one or two things, if other folks can take that away from this call and think through like what is most important, what is critical to have? Are there like one or two things? I mean, obviously we just talked about a bunch of them, but like what is like the one thing, like if you can be great at this, or this is something you as an entrepreneur need to do to achieve that success, however we want to define success.
Yeah, it's like not as fun an answer as you'd hope. Probably.
Sometimes the boring answers are the best ones.
It's not gonna be boring. So it's really, and I've been bad at this, and I think I was bad at this at Nuzzle, is really understanding where you are really with your product and with the amount of time and money you have, really being aware of where you are. And people really lose sight in this. So you raised $2.5 million. You've got $2.5 million in the bank. That's amazing. You've got 36 months of runway to do your vision, which, just pause for a second. Think how insane that is. I'm going to give you $3 million to go do something that you just thought of.
Yep.
Incredible. And then what happens is all of a sudden your team of 3 people is 9 people. And all of a sudden it's not 36 months. It's like 14 months. And a couple things that were going to happen slipped a little bit. And all of a sudden you're at 8 months. And now your pitch is sort of like, well, it's really interesting. We learned a couple things, but we're not quite there. And I think the people who are just cognizant early on, who manage their cash and go, okay, I haven't figured something out, so I'm going to keep the burn such that we have 24 to 36 months. Or I've started to figure something out and now I'm scaling the team. Or I haven't figured something out, I need to do something completely different. Having that awareness, which is really painful, and I haven't figured it out, because when we were in Nuzzle, probably 3 years before we stopped fighting, it was probably the case that like more than 1 million people are never going to use this. Having that level of self-awareness, however you do it, you have a friend who's going to be brutal with you, and acting on that pure knowledge of what's really happening with your product, I think is, if you can do that, you are going to win as an entrepreneur. And it's really hard, because every product you see that's going nowhere, that you're like, yeah, that didn't work, which is what 90% of things that people build, there's some entrepreneur behind it who's as passionate as you are and who cares about it as much and has the vision and the whole thing. If you can have that level of self-awareness about your product, I think you can make almost anything work.
Does that imply that you should stop working on that and move on? Or does it just mean being super honest with yourself will enable you to build? Like, should Nuzzle have pivoted at some point and said, you know what, like our core product, people love it, but it's not going to grow that big. Let's pivot immediately into something else. And like, is that what you mean?
This is the problem, because it's not that easy, right? We did pivot. We did try all different things. We turned into a competitive intelligence product. we tried a bunch of different things. So it didn't work. And there was probably a point where we should have said, like, this isn't going to work. That was years before. And now you can just do a complete pivot. Like, we've got a bunch of cash. Let's just go build, the next Instagram kind of thing. I think that happens very rarely, though. But yeah, we didn't figure it out, basically. Like, that's why Nuzzle's now a feature, and Twitter has it. And it's, somewhere in the Twitter stack, like lost to history. But it's really hard to do. And I mean, a classic thing is that you're just kind of like, well, we're going to get a couple customers and then a Series A firm is going to invest. Here's a simple version would be like this. We're going to get a couple customers and the Series A firm is going to invest. Go to the Series A firm right now and say, hey, here's my product. If I have 2 customers who say they love it, will you invest? And they might be like, no. And so the whole thing your team's working on is to get those 2 customers who say they love it, so you can have that slide. You could maybe right now find out that a Series A firm is going to be like, nah, that would have to be 10 and they'd have to be paying you.
But how could you actually get in front of that Series A firm? They're not going to even meet with you. I guess maybe they would if you're just
they will.
I have this company doing great, or like, how do you test that thesis?
Oh, this is the great trick of Silicon Valley is if you're asking for advice, anyone will meet you. So
very true.
If you call up, you ask a VC to come see your pitch, oh, I got 8 weeks from now in the morning at 10:30, I'm available. If you say, hey, I got something I'm trying to figure out, would you give me your advice? Tomorrow morning, they'll be on the phone with you tomorrow. A lot of at 8:00, and I think that's an example of just being like, with your investors or with your board. We see a lot of people marching towards something where we're like, if you get to that thing, and you might not, but if you do, I'm not sure a Series A firm is going to want to invest in you. So get realistic about it and go back to your team and say, maybe we can or maybe we can't get to 10 paying customers, but if we can't, they're not going to invest in us.
Yep.
And I don't want to tell you that getting to 2 paying customers who write a testimonial, say they love it, is going to work. That's what I mean on a tactical level. And I say this as somebody who failed to do it. So
yes, it's not easy to do, but it's one of those things that if you can pull it off, it becomes really valuable and important in being realistic. But it's hard because you can't get out of your own way because you're so deep as an entrepreneur. You're so deep in your product and obviously believe so deeply in it because you were crazy enough to go build it.
I think it's maybe to say, this is the way to say it, understanding how rare that moment is when you've raised $3 million and the whole world is before you, and how hard it is to get to that moment. Like you think like in 20, everything's getting funded and all that. That's not really true. Like, you told an amazing story and a bunch of people think you're an amazing person and you have $3 million. Make it work. Like, how precious that moment is, like in all the world. That's what I want people to think about, and don't go about the business of like, I'm going to hire 5 people and I'm going to do the thing. And you've got $3 million to achieve your vision. Like, how are you going to achieve goals and not run out of that money in a really realistic way that somebody's going to let you play the next round, which is the Series A.
Yep. And it's always, how do you play that next round and play better than you played the last round and keep leveling yourself up?
Yeah, exactly. I just know that, just step back for a second and go, somebody gave me $3 million just to build something. Wow. That doesn't happen to people, in the middle of Venezuela, running a farm. Like, that doesn't happen to anybody, but it happened to you. And if you can think about how amazing that is and really just think of what that means in terms of runway and milestones and keeping those 2 things in check. Warren Hoffman is always good about this. He talks about how he sips Warren Hoffman's like Jonathan Abrams, probably one of the most connected people in Silicon Valley. And then Warren Hoffman's above him. And then like Reid Hoffman's at the top. He talks about it. You just keep the capital like right, the minimum you need to use while you achieve the minimum thing you need to prove to get to the next thing. Being really cognizant of that, and not being like, oh, I raised $3 million, I'll raise another 3. It's easy. I think is a key to, it'll certainly increase your odds a lot.
Correct. And to the point about playing the different games and telling the right story, it's easy to get really good at telling the VC story and get the ego hit from being like, oh man, I just raised all this money, and show off to your friends. And like, that's not a real metric. The real metric is building a product and company and team who is excited to go to work every day and changing the lives of your customers.
Yeah. And the game just changed. Like the second you raise money, the game before you raise money was, do you have an amazing story? You're a great person. You worked at Facebook, your whole story. As soon as you raise money, the new game is you spent $2 million over 18 months. What did you accomplish?
Yeah.
That's the new story. So make sure I took $2 million and I did more than anybody has ever done. And I've accomplished so much in terms of you've never seen somebody spend $2 million and achieve more. That's got to be your new story. Yeah. Not, well, we went 18 months and it took us a little longer than we thought. We need more money to keep going. Worst story.
Delivery and execution, right? And this also goes to something that I try to remind entrepreneurs sometimes, like, look, ideas are a dime a dozen, but execution is what it really comes down to. And that's what people need to focus on, is execute really well at every point in the game. And what I execute on today is different than tomorrow and different next week.
Yeah.
And it's constantly changing. And I need to be ready as an entrepreneur to handle all of those different needs of execution.
Which is why whenever we see like a stealth mode or a private beta, we look twice and a second time and really think that through, because that is the opposite. Sometimes you need to be in a private beta. You never need to be in stealth mode.
Yep.
That's just the wrong, to us, 9 times out of 10, that's the wrong attitude.
Yep. The
right attitude is like, here's what I'm doing. Here's the name of my company. Will you please try it? Thank God anybody's using it.
Get out there, get users. Don't be afraid. Where can people find you if they want to get advice? The secret. Hey, I'm just going to ask Kent for advice. Where can they go about finding you, learning from you, and hearing more?
Yeah, the 8-Bit Capital has a website. Who knew?
The web is still alive. The web is still alive.
8-Bit Capital. Yeah, and the email, you won't remember the email if I say it now, but there are emails there. Just email us and we'll respond. We love talking to entrepreneurs. Reach out to us for advice. If you're building a company, we're investing in people who are building companies. So we'd love to hear from people. And it's really cool talking to you. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, it is absolutely my pleasure. This is fun. And hopefully, the goal that we have and that I have personally is I want to, the beauty of Silicon Valley, and as someone to maybe conclude where we started to some extent, right? Why are we both in San Francisco? It's because this place is filled with optimism. It's filled with ideas. It's filled with people trying to change the world. Most will fail, and that is okay. And that's what makes it a really cool place, and the ability to speak and for me to learn from people like you.
Yeah.
How can I keep improving myself and hopefully sharing that knowledge with the world? So all of us, the rising tide can lift every single boat of every entrepreneur. It's my goal and why I do this.
It's amazing. And if you think of any other form of finance or business, the thing where my success makes your success possible is not that common in the world. Mm-hmm. And the thing where somebody says, I want you to succeed because I invested in you, and I want you to meet this guy who's actually at another venture firm, but that's okay because I want him to. That thing where it works for you to help people is not that common in business. And that it's the zeitgeist here and the way people work, and the fact that when it works, your company's worth $100 billion. It's the worst place, but it's better than all the other ones, right? So
exactly right. And that is why we're here doing this. So once again, Kent, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I thank you. I really appreciate it. So.